Leadership is an idea that gets talked about a lot, but is rarely understood. Robert Greenleaf is generally considered to be the preeminent figure in servant leadership. Greenleaf was born to a Quaker family in 1904. Incidentally, that is the same faith practiced by Parker Palmer, author of the book Let Your Life Speak, which we just read. Former President Richard Nixon was also a Quaker, although he didn't quite practice the core principles of the faith. Quakers are Christians, sometimes known as the Society of Friends. They have no clergy. Instead, each member of the community contributes to the leadership of the group. Quakers are generally pacifists, and they place a high value on the idea of discernment through community. They believe that all people have the light of the Spirit within themselves. They are also known for dedication to the common good, so it's probably no surprise that both Palmer and Greenleaf have such reflective, community-oriented philosophies. And no, they don't dress like the guy on the Quaker Oats box. I'm not sure why they decided to put an 18th century Quaker on an oatmeal box. Greenleaf worked for AT&T for 26 years. He became disillusioned with the kind of power-based, authoritarian leadership models that he observed in the corporate world. So when he retired, he didn't take up golf. Instead, he began to study and write about servant leadership. Greenleaf believed that in order to be a servant leader, one has to become a servant first, then become a leader. This was very different from the prevailing notions of leadership like the great man and trait theories that suggested a leader's role is to create a vision and persuade others through their natural charisma to execute it. Greenleaf thought that leaders should be judged by two principles. First of all, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely to become servants themselves? And secondly, what is the effect of the leader on the least privileged in society? A modern take on servant leadership comes from Simon Sinek, who wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last. The title comes from the Marine Corps, where it is common practice for officers to eat after the soldiers they lead, even if that means there isn't enough food. Not everyone believes that servant leadership is realistic, but whatever your opinion, it's a good example of integrity. Stephen Carter, a law professor at Yale, wrote a book on integrity. He argues that there are 3 steps to practicing integrity. The first is to discern what is right and what is wrong. The second is to act on what you've discerned, even at personal cost. The third is to tell people that you are acting on your understanding of right and wrong. In order to determine what is right and wrong, we must do ethical deliberation. Fred Waldstein argues that ethics is the study of moral obligations, or of separating right from wrong. Ethics can also be the accepted guidelines for groups or institutions. Integrity begins with ethics, discerning what is right and wrong. Integrity is about acting consistently with your ethical values that you've discerned. That may seem like a really minor distinction, but it does matter. It's possible to have integrity, to act consistently with your values, but if they're not based on an ethical framework, they could be the wrong values. That's why it's important for ethics to be discerned in community. After all, even dictators can be said to have integrity. They act consistently with what they believe is right and wrong, but I think we can generally agree that their ideas of right and wrong are based on narrow individual interpretations, usually in their own self-interest. In this session, we were introduced to the idea of servant leadership and explored the difference between ethics and integrity. As you think about your own leadership, do you see yourself as a servant first and a leader second? How does this change your leadership practice? What are the ethical values guiding your leadership? Are they being discerned in community or only by yourself? And finally, do you demonstrate integrity in living out these values consistently? Take some time to think about that this week as we continue talking about ethics, leadership, and integrity.